What's up guys, this is Miasin. So this is going to be an interesting video because I'm not going to be making, like a top 10 best decks in order. I'm rather going to be talking about everything that might actually have a fair chance at winning YCS Indianapolis. And I'm going to be going over everything in detail. And I'm also going to give you guys some pointers on what to look out for and what decks might be more or less dangerous than you actually think they might be. I think I might be on some spies that the average player might not be aware of. If you actually playtest a lot online, or if you at least know what people are on, you should have kind of like a good insight on what people are playing. So anyways, before we proceed, just friendly reminder to smash the like and subscribe button. There are, I believe, 5 or like 6 or 7 combo decks at the moment. Basically, what a combo deck is, in case you're not familiar, is a deck that just wants to go big or go home on turn 1. It doesn't really try to play for several turns, even though some of them actually can have some decent grind game sometimes, but for the most part, they're especially only really good at the very beginning of the game, whereas trap decks, on the other hand, are usually really bad early on, but they're really good late game. The combo decks, most of them, I'm gonna be, again, straight up honest and direct, are potentially not worth playing at the moment. I think a lot of people are pretty well prepared for the most part. The main flaw that they all share is that they all lose to Shifter. For the most part, they also all lose to Drool, and some of them lose to Nibiru. Not all of them. It depends on the deck, it depends on the playstyle, but there are a lot of them. So there's the regular Tier Elements deck, and then there's the Horus Tier Elements. You could also be playing Horus in a bunch of decks, but I want to say the Tier Elements deck is probably the one that does it the best. And then there is the Dark World deck, which benefits off of the new Gen and Ken monsters, which are TCG exclusives from Age of Overlord. Although, one funny thing is, some builds are not even playing these new cards because they don't want to waste their normal summon on that. They rather need their normal summon on Lava Golem to break boards going second, and they're still playing pretty much the same build as before. So for them, it doesn't even impact them that they're now Gen and Ken. And there's also Pendulum Magician, which is a pretty nasty deck, so this card just gives you a lot of gas, and of course they do have Astrograph Magician. There's some nice combos that you can do, but one issue that I always had with Pendulum Magician is that it doesn't really, at least without Electrum, you're not really playing through Nibiru, because by the time you get to make some negates, it's already summon number like 75, because the Beyond the Pendulum makes it so that it negates everything on your board. So if you have to go into it, it's not like you can use like Jackal King or something to negate stuff. Either way, I don't think the deck has like very good counters to Nibiru. It is unfortunate, it is sad to say, but yeah, unfortunately, as long as Nibiru is a thing, as long as Anti-Spell and D-Barrier are a thing, this deck is just maybe not super ideal, even though it's still a decent deck. And this card is a 1-card Zark, which is very good. If you summon Zark on the opponent's turn, it's just cracked. Like, you destroy everything on your opponent's field. So you have to be aware of the existence of the Magician deck, but at the same time, Pendulum is Pendulum. Regardless of how much power you give them, as long as they don't have Electrum, they still have the exact same flaws they always had, on top of just randomly losing to some of your hand traps that, maybe didn't even exist before. This deck, I want to say the Pendulum deck, is the kind of deck that you should probably consider playing when people are not playing, Anti-Spell, D-Barrier, and Drool and Nibiru, and are rather playing hand traps like Bestials, DD Crow, Ghost Bell, because they do not affect this deck. Even though this is a combo deck, it is the one combo deck that doesn't really lose too hard to Shifter, because you can still make like Baguska or stuff like that, so it's not the end of the world. But yeah, this is a very good deck still nonetheless, so yeah, be on the lookout for that. And then there is also Manadome, which is a deck that got a heavy boost from the newer support, because the Chusugda is a card that allows not only Realm Heart to be a 1-card full combo, but also the Calarium to be like a semi 1-card combo. So Realm Heart becomes the full thing if you play Synchro Rumbles, so SP Little Knight, as well as, hold on a second, I think you should end on Baron as well, and King Calamity on your opponent's turn, which is pretty insane. And if you only have Calarium and nothing else, then you can still make like SP Little Knight with Baron and Dispatter, which is pretty good off of one single card. So this is the kind of combo deck that can also play a lot of hand traps, which is really nice, because more often than not, combo decks, they don't really have the ability to play a lot of hand traps. By the way, one thing that I forgot to cover here is Infernoble, actually. That is also another combo deck that I should be including. I planned on talking about it, it's just that it's not here on the screen, so that you guys can't really see it. But yeah, Manadome is a good deck, it's just that, again, it loses really hard to Droll. And again, every single combo deck just also loses to Dweller and Gravekeeper's Inscription, which unfortunately are cards that, you know, everyone is trying to turbo out if they can actually play those cards. Like the Rescue Ace deck, for example, it is definitely trying to Dweller you or Ibly lock you, and the Purrely deck is definitely trying to hit you with that Gravekeeper's Inscription. Flundereeze is trying to Shifter you. So again, if you're playing combo, and you're playing against the popular mid-range decks, then you're gonna have to always deal against a card that just insta-wins against you. Now, the Infernoble deck, on the other hand, is a very interesting combo deck because it doesn't really care that much about Dweller. I mean, it kind of does in a way, but not that hard because you do have some grave effects. Like, I mean, yeah, your effects to it like equip, but like you can still play around the Dweller. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't even kill you that hard. Baguska kind of hurts way more, but then you can just SP Little Knight, banish it away. So it's not the end of the world. I want to say Infernoble is a really good deck. In the right hands, this is one of the better combo decks to play. Going second might be a little rough, but going first, it is probably the best combo deck going first overall. Nobody really understands the choke points of this deck, so they might hand shop the wrong things. And the end board is a complete FTK. Like, if you successfully manage to full combo with Infernoble, there is no way you lose because you're gonna be ending on like double of this Link 1 Charles, as well as the field spell, which is completely cracked, and potentially this card right here, Angelica's Angelic Ring. This card negates the first spell card that your opponent uses that resolves, so you're gonna have like spell and trap, like activation negates. So hold on a second. Also trap, yeah. So evenly does nothing. And then if your opponent's spell actually resolves, it still gets negated because of this. So in other words, this card out super poly. So there's literally nothing that beats the Infernoble deck. It's ridiculous. But again, you do have to play some bad cards in order to make Infernoble work, which is unfortunate. And it doesn't have Smoke Grenade or anything, so it's not the same deck as it used to be. But it doesn't lose to popular hand traps like Bestials, for example. So that's not too bad because Manadome, as well as Dark World and Tier Elements, they do lose to Bestials. But this deck still loses, I want to say, to Shifter, even though you should be able to do some things through Shifter. Probably not that much, though, so I don't think it's really worth it. I mean, I really don't think you can do much, honestly, if you get Shiftered in Infernoble. Now, the TG deck, I don't know much about it, but I don't really like it too much. I mean, it's just a very old deck. And even though the new support is really nice, it's still Copium for the most part. Why play TG when you can just play Manadome, which is the better King Calamity deck? And it's just like less complicated for no reason. Like if you're playing TG, it's only because you want to catch people off guard or because you want to be cool and have a feature match. Like honestly, that's the only logical explanation. But yeah, anyways, just be on the lookout for these combo decks. Now for the trap decks, this is arguably a combo deck, but the Labyrinth deck got a new support in the form of Arias the Labyrinth Butler. Definitely a good card, but not every build is going to be playing it. The furniture build maybe play like 1 copy or maximum 2, and then the heavy trap build probably will play 2 copies of this card. It's definitely a good card, but not like an unfair broken card, and it's not gonna make Labyrinth like completely insane. It's not on the same level as I want to say the support that Manadome got, which is way better. It's one of the best supports from this set. But yeah, so that's it for the combo decks and the trap decks. Now for the mid-range decks, which is the biggest category, I want to say here, we've got a lot of decks and they all share something in common for the most part. They're either decks that can shifter you or not lose the shifter or have, you know, a lot of backup plans and just still be able to combo off even though they're not combo decks. So for example, Unchained is not a combo deck. It doesn't really lose to too many things that the other decks lose to. It can definitely play around Nibiru and Bestials if you're good with it. If you're good with the deck, it doesn't lose them much, but you're not making like unbreakable boards. You can still lose even when you pass turn. Whereas if you play one of these combo decks, if you get uninterrupted, you probably win the game. Whereas Unchained can lose to board breakers. These decks do not typically lose to board breakers. Their end boards are way too good. In Dark World, board breakers are the worst things against them because you're getting hand looped, so you need hand traps for Dark World. But even though I don't think a lot of people will be playing Dark World. Anyways, for Unchained again, praise on people's incorrect deck building in a way. For example, if you main deck Droll, yeah, sure, you do have an advantage against these decks, but not against Unchained because it just doesn't search anything from the deck. Like, you can even search from the graveyard to the hand, so it just can completely bypass the Droll. It's not really going to be doing anything for you, and Unchained just plays really well going second. It's a very safe deck. It's kind of like the Salamangreat of the format, where it's equally good going first and second, but it's never unfair. It's just always very good. but the power level is definitely much higher, and as long as people are just playing incorrectly against this deck, it will always just take advantage of that. But it does have a lot of bad matchups, I want to say. Like, the Flunderies matchup is unwinnable. Like, it's really, really bad. To the point where their end board now is Beatrice to send the Necworld Banshee into Zombie World. So they're not even making the Caesar against the Flunderies deck. And they also kind of have a bad matchup against Tier Elements. It depends on the build, but the Horus version is kind of easy because they can just use the trap card on the continuous spell, and then they just go neg 2. I mean, neg 1, but still. And then the regular Tier Elements version, I mean, they just kind of destroy the Unchained deck because they can chain block, so even the Caesar doesn't do that much. And Divine, they don't really have like any negates against you, so against their whole board, you can just go normal Diviner effect, and then they go like, oh fuck, yeah, here we go again. So yeah, Unchained is still a good deck though. And then Flunderies, obviously, I mean, I hate this deck, I actually think it sucks, but the appeal with Flunderies is, you know, it's sad to say, but it plays Shifter and Featherstorm. That's it. The only good cards in this deck, and then everything else is dog shit. Anyways, Dragon Link, this deck is also what I kind of consider to be a garbage deck. Outside of the Bestials, they hard carry the deck. The Rocket deck itself is just really bad, or rather the Rocket portion of the deck. Heretic Seal carries, and then Borland is the Link 5 is also very, very good. But apart from that, I mean, it's just another okay-ish deck where you're never really doing anything too unfair, but again, like, the Bestials are just insanely good. And if you're playing against one of these decks, then the Bestials are going to be, like, remarkable. I mean, not Pendulum Magician, but you get the point. And it's still a mid-range deck, but it does have, like I said, the ability to combo off, so that's the common trait with most of these decks for the most part, even though they're not really super aggressive. They don't really lose too hard to Nibiru, they don't really lose that hard to Droll. I mean, Dragon Link can lose to Droll, it really depends, and sometimes it just doesn't lose to Droll whatsoever, because the Magnamut can still recycle back from grave to hand, and you can still pass on like a decent enough board through the Droll and Logbird. Nothing forces you to like commit to everything and then just go neg for like one negate. I do believe that Dragon Link is a good option at the moment, but anyways, Rescue Ace is one of the titans of this format. It has so many variations, so many different builds that people are experimenting with. Some people are doing the Synchro version with Jet Synchron. It's not the kind of thing that you can always do, but they can go into Borlode Savage or Baron de Fleur, and then they have 2 Omni Negates, which is way better than the Terahertz build. And then they still have like everything else because they still go like Turbulence at 4, so that's really nasty. So they can do that, and they can Dweller you, Ably Lock you. It's kind of insane. The deck got way more consistent because of the Sinful Spoils engine. So yeah, it's kind of cracked, but going second, I mean, it plays a lot of bricks, so it can sometimes just not do anything. It can also still play a lot of hand traps, so that's nice, but I mean, Rescue Ace is still Rescue Ace. Like, there's no Max C either in this format, so I actually think this deck is way worse in the TCG, but because of the fact that it's relatively new, because of the Sinful Spoils card just giving it a reason to exist, it's going to see a lot of play, but I don't think it's that great. I actually think for the most part, this deck is more hype than it really is good. It is clearly a tier 1 deck, but by no means like anything remotely close to tier 0. Honestly, the decks that are closest to tier 0 would be Unchained and Tier Elements. These decks are like the true titans. But the reason why I'm saying that Rescue Ace is still a deck that you have to be aware of is because it's going to be played a lot. It's a very safe deck. Like I said, it kind of has that Salamangreat-esque feeling where everybody can just kind of pick up the deck. And if you resolve Turbulence, you don't really need to be that great at the game. You're generating so much advantage that you can just win against pretty much everyone. Whereas Unchained, on the other hand, you have to be good at the game. And Tier Elements, the same thing. These decks are not easy to play, whereas this should be easier to play. Same thing with Flunderies, like you get carried by, you know, your Shifter and Featherstorm. You have to know what to do against it, and you have to play the correct cards because a lot of hand traps are just pretty bad against Rescue Ace. And Shifter is actually not that great. It's kind of one of those decks that don't really have like a huge weakness. Anyways, now we've got Runic based strategies. Again, very good. There's Runic Sprite for hire, etc. There's also the Chimera Runic deck, which I actually like a lot. This is the superior branded build, I want to say. There's branded Despia and then branded Chimera, but this deck utilizes branded Fusion in a better way because branded Fusion is more of like a backup plan or a bait, whereas in the Despia deck, branded Fusion is your only plan. So if you get ashed in the Despia deck, you do nothing. Whereas if you get ashed on Branded Fusion in this deck, you have your Mirror Swords Knight. So you can use the Mirror Sword Knight to bait Ash, which I don't think makes any sense, or Branded Fusion to bait Ash, which is way better. It's actually crazy to see that you can have so many good pushes. This deck just does so much with one single card, and the new Baphomet Fusion is cracked because this deck just went from like almost a controlled deck to like a very aggressive deck that can turbo out the Bearer statue as well as End of Anubis and some other cards actually. So yeah, you have to be kind of conscious of the existence of these floodgates, and you need to have like a game plan for these cards, because if you only have like, you know, cards that for like other matchups and you think that this is a free matchup because it loses to like Valor, Imperm, or Ash, you might have like a bad surprise. Anyways, Despia, not a really big fan of this deck, don't really play it, but still, like the Branded Fusion, the Branded Engine is still going to be played in this deck, and the Despia deck is still going to see play, but there's not much that, it's not like you're gonna be getting hit by Gimmick Puppet Lock too much. It's still a thing, but not a lot of people are doing that. And finally, we've got Vanquish Soul, which is another one of the really good mid-range decks from Age of Overlord, because there's now Jialong, so you don't have to play the dog shit Pluton. That card sucks so much. This is the superior fire monster to play, and it actually has a good effect, so that's nice. So yeah, a lot of decks. Again, this is a very diverse format, but even though it is diverse, it's not like you have to be trying to beat like all those decks at once, because the majority of those decks are not real. For example, nobody's going to be playing TG, even though it has a very high power level, it still sucks. And then Despia, it's probably not going to see too much play. Runic and Sprite decks, not going to see too much play. Dragon Link is going to see a little bit of play. You're going to be playing against one Dragon Link in your 10 or 11 or 12 rounds, and then you're going to be playing anywhere between 1 to 2 Flunderies, 1 to 2 Unchained, 2 to 3 Tearlaments, and then probably 3 Rescue Ace. That makes a lot of sense. And then you're going to be playing against like one of those big combo decks, so like one Dark World or one Manadome, or one Pendulum Magician, probably one Labyrinth as well. You're not going to be playing against the exact same deck 7 times. It's just, like I said, absolutely not going to happen. Anyways, time for me to play to talk about what I believe might actually be the true best deck of the format, and I actually think it's Purrely. This deck is kind of cracked. It's one of the only decks that it only loses to one very specific card in the side deck, which is Xyz Encore, and everybody and their mother is forced to play this card and draw this card against this deck, because otherwise, you're never gonna beat it. It is absolutely ridiculous. Like, Purrely Noir just, it plays well into everything. This deck inherently has no real weakness, if you really think about it. It doesn't lose to Bestials at all, unless you have to, like, go quick play, discard, like, a light or dark cat. Well, I mean, they're both light and dark, but you get the point. And then play from there, and even then, like, the Bestial is only used to like interrupt the little Noir from setting the trap card. DD Crow obviously is good against the deck, but yeah, for the most part, one hand trap is not going to be enough. This is a very high ceiling deck, very consistent deck as well, very safe deck. It's good going first and second. It's one of the only decks that I can think of that inherently breaks boards with its engine, Unchained being the other one. So if you don't like relying on hand traps in order to, you know, beat people going second, Unchained and Purrely are actually your best options, especially if you don't want to lose to like Dweller and stuff like that. And if the Rescue Ace deck is turboing out Dweller against you blind, well, Purrely is going to be really happy about that. And if they're ably locking you, you can dedicate one slot in your extra deck for the Lingeribo, and that's going to be giving you even more gas to just break the whole board. So honestly, there's just so many good things to say about Purrely. I genuinely believe that it's the best deck in the format right now, the true deck to beat. And I would not be shocked whatsoever if this deck actually took on everything, because it has just so many good matchups. Like I said, the field spell, the straight Purrely Street, it completely carries against Rescue Ace, like completely. And it even carries against the Unchained deck, so this matchup is not too bad. And the Tearlaments matchup is also pretty good, especially if you're like building to beat it, if you're like main decking Droll and stuff like that. It should be very good. And again, as I've explained, this deck can abuse both Gravekeeper's Inscription as well as Shifter, because you can actually just play with your yellow cats and you should be fine. I want to say the best deck in the game is a deck that can use SP Little Knight, because this card is cracked. And the Typhon is going to be a card that will see a lot of play this format, but not as much as SP. This card will not replace Zeus whatsoever, but it is good against almost everything that I can think of. Ironically, Purrely only really summons from the extra deck once in like the first turn that it plays, so it doesn't open up the door to Typhon being summoned. And by the way, in case you're wondering, Labyrinth is actually the best deck to be able to abuse Typhon, because it doesn't really care too much if it can't summon for the rest of the turn. You don't really need that much, and like you can turn like a furniture into a Typhon and just play from there. So this card's really good against like the combo decks as well. If you don't respect this card and you just end on like a bunch of negates with like 3k and more attack, you're gonna be losing a lot of games to Typhon. So this is a message to those Manadome players that end on Baron de Fleur and Bestial Dispatter. or the, I don't know, like a lot of decks that I'm actually aiming here that actually just end on like very high attack monsters. But yeah, Baron de Fleur is still a really good card. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything here to cover. I think I've pretty much talked about everything. Oh, and I'm just getting a message now. But yeah, anyways, that's all I had, honestly, for this video. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know your thoughts about this format in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.